All he's saying is these societies were subject to the pressures of every other society in all of human history. He tries to read Marxism into the thread somewhere. These stresses were serious, but they did not reduce Greece to chaos. Colonization funneled off some of the discontented elements. There's discontented elements again, both aristocratic and plebeian. The expansiveness of the Greeks' economic system again permitted the upper classes to have more worldly goods without necessarily exploiting all other elements. Indeed, new social classes were rising which sometimes were as wealthy as the old aristocrats. There we go. I don't know what that first bit was about, but new aristocrats were arising because in this economy, it's economic gain that has an emphasis placed on it. You're no longer a noble by birth. You can become rich and wealthy through other means, so that becomes an important part. Above all, the old sense of communal loyalty was still strong enough to lead the more discerning aristocrats, such as Solon of Athens, to check the excesses of their fellows in a spirit of noblesse oblige. Okay, all he's saying there is there were certain politicians and thinkers who were more far-sighted and rational and reasonable. And he tries to give a Marxist class interpretation of the reason for that and puts it on tradition of communal loyalty to his community rather than to his class, right? So why does he have to read that in there? Communal loyalty and class loyalty are both stupid. Some rulers were more rational and far-sighted than others. Skipping a bit, a Greek aristocrat did not disdain wealth, which permitted him an easy life, but he tended to frown upon industrial and commercial pursuits, as against the profits of agriculture, politics, and warfare. So growing something out of the land, they could tell that was noble. And politics, obviously, that's noble, because being a king is noble, or an aristocrat. And war, hell, that's noble, everyone knows that's noble. But what about trade? What about making something and selling it, pottery or something? What about buying grain and selling it again? Is that noble? No, that's not noble, that's evil. Evil, 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 evil. Sucker leeching off other people. You just buy it from this guy and sell it to that guy. Why couldn't they just get together and you would be out of a job and starving? That was their attitude back then. But in Greece, that becomes less the attitude than in any other society ever before. Above all, the aristocrat must know how to make proper use of his leisure existence. Now this is the aristocratic outlook that we are looking at. The leisurely existence. What should an aristocrat do with his free time? As a youth, he learned to be physically supple, to play the lyre, and to read and write. Beauty and external grace were qualities closely associated with virtue in an aristocrat's mind. Later, in classical times, the patterns of aristocratic virtue were woven into the system of formal education which then appeared. Now, where did they get formal education? Or, cut that bit. Now, here's an interesting bit. Quote, when the Romans took over the Greek educational scheme, they absorbed these inherent values and passed them on to medieval and modern Europe. So ultimately, looks like the massive establishment of the Roman educational system, but it was entirely Greek. They just took it over. And the values inherent in it, the values that were being preached in it. The aristocratic scale of values was not that of the peasants, though in many basic respects the aristocratic outlook incarnated the general views of early Greek society. Nor did the Greek upper classes esteem the virtues of humility, brotherly love, and meekness, which Christian preachers were later to proclaim. Beside the cardinal qualities of courage, temperance, justice, and wisdom, went proper greatness of spirit, due magnificence of living, and especially a fierce competitiveness for honor and glory in games and public life. That was what they held to be virtuous. "Speak your enemy fair," said the aristocratic Theognis, "but when you have him in your power, be avenged without pretext." So speak nicely of him and so on, but when you have a chance, don't hesitate. Now there's a full paragraph of nothing but class tripe. Marxists, we'll skip that. To enhance their position, the aristocrats placed greater emphasis upon the legends by which noble houses derived their inception from a union of God and mortal maid. So he says, at this time in history, it became more and more common for legends to say, for legends to give a justification of this or that house of rule, this or that other house of aristocracy. I'm not certain that the aristocrats were in control. The aristocrats were a class, if you can even get there. They were a class, and individual thinkers are in control of the culture. So the class didn't do anything. They said to enhance their position, they didn't create anything. They didn't place emphasis on anything. They didn't do anything. Individuals did stuff. And it was only a few individuals, wherever. These damn Marxists. They think economics moves history. You gotta watch it. They'll put evidence there, and then they put some tripe, and you just gotta look at the evidence and move on, you know? But let us go forward. But even so, the aristocrats were not able to maintain their dominant position everywhere. They tried. Of course they tried. Some aristocrats themselves engaged in overseas trade. Oh, and undermined their positions. And in mercenary service, and the tyrants who arose in the era tended to admit the nouveau riches to upper levels. Before the end of the 7th century, the poet Alcaeus of Lesbos was fulminating at this situation. For, as they say, Aristodemos spoke no foolish saying once in Sparta. Money maketh man, and no poor man is noble or held in honor. So that's why the Spartans didn't want money in their situation. Money makes men. Poor men are not noble. So the Spartans were like, you can only use iron for money. Anyways, in the middle of the 6th century came Theognis of Megara, who sounds like a hopeless conservative in his insistence that birth, not wealth, should be primary. For even he had to admit that poverty was one of man's worst curses. So he comes on the scene and says, no, forget about money, guys. What's important is who was his father. Right. That's what we need to go back to. The student of ancient Greek history, however, must be careful not to call these rising elements a middle class in the modern sense. Of course not. The new well-to-do groups strove to make themselves as much like the aristocrats as possible in the social sphere, so they were upwardly mobile. They didn't just want to be a middle class, they were on the way up as far as they could go. And they usually united with the upper class politically, if given a chance. So they didn't remain loyal to their class roots in the working class. They became traitors. They abandoned the working class. They were an upwardly mobile middle class, not a good pure middle class, not the factory middle class that communism has today, right? But the detestable middle class that wants to get up higher in society. Unlike what other middle class, sir? What tripe? Greek states remained essentially divided into the rich and the poor, though each side was now far more complicated than in the Dark Ages. But, of course, everything's always divided into rich and poor. We know that. We know that, Marx. The communal unity of the polis was only partially successful in restraining the mutual hostility which tended to result. Right. Summary. This is the last, what do we have, about a page and a half here. And we will be finished with Starr, and then we will be going on to another text, Hellenic History, Botsford. But let's summarize what we've just gone over. By the last decades of the 7th century, the Greek world had progressed far beyond its simple state of 750. A tremendous outrush of colonization had thrown nuclei of Greeks organized